Building on my past sessions about accuracy shortcuts and their pitfalls in AI and machine learning, let's now put that knowledge into practice. I'll demonstrate how to use learning dynamics assessment to determine if a model can actually be trusted in clinical practice. Working with our talented medical students, we recently published a study on retinal pathology classification using machine learning. This study proved to be an ideal case for demonstrating learning dynamics assessment, showing exactly how these dynamics reveal model reliability and true generalization capability in healthcare settings. Let me show you what we discovered. Let's start with the problem statement. Traditional machine learning metrics, particularly accuracy, are insufficient for validating clinical deployment readiness. Learning dynamics assessment provides the critical insight into whether models have learned generalizable patterns or merely memorized training data. This approach prioritizes clinical reliability and patient safety over headline performance numbers. A model might achieve high accuracy in your test environment, but if it's overfitted or can't handle the variability of real-world clinical settings, it becomes a liability rather than a tool. This is the fundamental problem. Accuracy alone tells us almost nothing about whether a model is actually safe to deploy. Learning dynamics analysis must be mandatory for any performance claim. Reporting accuracy without it should disqualify a model from clinical consideration, regardless of how impressive the numbers appear. Therefore, a deep understanding of the model's learning process is essential. We must explore training and validation performance dynamics to ensure reliability and safety in patient care. Again, it's not optional, it's mandatory for responsible clinical AI deployment. To do this, we used a comprehensive data set with diverse pathologies, but the key was comparing different modeling approaches using a robust multi-tier evaluation framework. Let's start by defining learning curves. Learning curves plot training and validation accuracy over time. They're diagnostic tools that show whether your model is learning generalizable patterns or just memorizing data. This distinction is fundamental for safe clinical deployment. For example, here, Algorithm 1 shows unhealthy dynamics, no convergence, and a large gap between training and validation. Algorithm 2 shows healthy learning. Both curves evolve smoothly, then stabilize and plateau, while maintaining a small, appropriate gap, with the training curve staying slightly above validation, as it should. But here's the critical problem. Most papers only report final accuracy numbers. Those numbers alone would mislead you into thinking Algorithm 1 is superior when the learning curves prove it's actually unreliable. This is precisely why learning dynamics matter more than final metrics. Let's take a step back and get into the characteristics of healthy learning curves. A healthy model shows training and validation curves that converge during training and ultimately plateau together with minimal separation at convergence. This final parallel plateau indicates true learning rather than memorization, demonstrating effective generalization for handling unseen clinical data reliably. Healthy learning curves should exhibit clear overall trends during training. The general direction of improvement should be evident, despite some natural fluctuation. This relative stability tells us that the optimization process is working efficiently. The model is learning gradually, without becoming overly sensitive to specific training examples or noise in the data. This is exactly the kind of stable, predictable learning behavior we need for clinical deployment. Training accuracy should stay slightly above validation. That's normal, since the model optimizes on training data. A small, consistent gap means healthy learning. A large gap, overfitting. No gap or validation exceeding training, that signals data leakage or training problems. We're looking for that small, appropriate separation. Those were the signs of healthy learning curves. Now, let's flip the coin and recap the red flags. The warning patterns that disqualify a model from clinical consideration, no matter how impressive the accuracy numbers might look. Overfitting is characterized by a model memorizing the training data to perfection, achieving near perfect or even 100% accuracy during training, while validation accuracy stays much lower. This gap shows the model is unable to generalize to new data. It memorized patterns, not learned them. This makes the model unreliable for actual clinical use, where every patient case is unique. Validation instability, meaning erratic fluctuations in the curves, reveals oversensitivity to training data. Such instability can result in just getting lucky when the accuracy happens to be high at the end of training. This is similar to cherry-picking the best results. You might report impressive final accuracy that doesn't reflect the model's typical inconsistent performance. For clinical applications, this instability makes the model fundamentally unreliable for patient care. Premature saturation is when training accuracy maxes out too early and validation performance just stagnates. The model has memorized examples instead of learning generalizable patterns, similar to a student who memorizes questions and answers without understanding the underlying concepts. This usually means the architecture or training approach is suboptimal, the model has hit a ceiling and can't improve further, making it unreliable for deployment. Beyond learning curves, there are other complementary ways to study performance metrics and spot red flags. Learning curves show us how the model trains, but we also need to examine its performance across different data splits. This gives us a more complete picture of model reliability. In machine learning, we expect a structured, decreasing order in performance metrics, meaning training performance should exceed validation's performance, which exceeds internal testing's performance, which exceeds external testing's performance. Why? Because the model is optimized directly on training data, so it naturally performs best there. And as data becomes less familiar, first validation, then internal test, then external, performance should decline gradually. This monotonic decrease tells us the model learned generalizable patterns, not dataset-specific artifacts. When we see this expected hierarchy, it confirms the model will perform predictably in real-world scenarios. So what exactly does this monotonic decrease tell us? A gradual, consistent decline across all evaluation phases means the model learned generalizable patterns, not memorization. This monotonic decrease is vital. It proves the model will perform reliably in real-world clinical settings with diverse patient data. Non-monotonic patterns reveal critical problems, such as data leakage, where the model sees test information during training. These flaws produce misleadingly high metrics that don't reflect real-world performance. By performance metrics, I don't mean just accuracy. Plot F1, recall, sensitivity, all of them, across every data subset. The key is seeking monotonic decrease on all metrics, not just accuracy. If any metric increases downstream, that's a red flag, regardless of how accuracy behaves. Let's apply this to our study. Algorithm 1 achieved 91% cross-validation accuracy. Impressive, right? But look at the learning curves. Training accuracy stays at 100% throughout, while validation barely improves from 87 to 91%. This massive gap screams overfitting. Pure memorization, not learning. Despite the highest reported accuracy, this model is disqualified for clinical use. The learning dynamics tell the real story. Now let's look at algorithm 2. The learning curves also reveal classic overfitting. Training accuracy reaches 100%, hitting this ceiling halfway through training. Meanwhile, validation accuracy barely improves, rising from around 70% to just under 80%, then stagnating. This massive 20 percentage point gap that persists throughout training is a textbook overfitting signature. The model has memorized the training data rather than learning generalizable patterns. This behavior too disqualifies it for clinical deployment. Let's not dismiss this algorithm just yet. What if we try augmenting it to salvage it? And it worked. Now the learning curves look promising, with smooth convergence and a clear plateau. The training curve sits slightly above the validation curve, which is typically a sign of a well-functioning model. That's encouraging. But before we consider it for clinical use, let's test one more algorithm to have more to choose from, and most importantly, evaluate all of them for the desired not too steep monotonic decrease across training, validation, test, and external data. Good learning curves are a start, but they're not enough. We need the full picture. Here's that one more algorithm. And look at that. It also yields learning curves that look promising, a hallmark of a well-functioning model. Both curves show convergence and parallel plateau with appropriate gap. Encouraging. But remember, healthy learning curves alone aren't sufficient. So let's check them all for that critical monotonic decrease across all data splits. We can straight up dismiss the first algorithm because it has very bad learning curves. No point wasting time on that one. So let's focus on the remaining candidates. Algorithm 2, both with and without augmentation, and algorithm 3. Now I'll evaluate how they fare with the monotonic decrease principle across all data splits. Non-monotonic results, which is when performance unexpectedly improves on less familiar data, are a major red flag. This pattern typically signals serious issues: data leakage, where test information contaminated training; improper data splitting that doesn't respect true independence; or unrepresentative data sets that don't reflect real-world conditions. This undermines confidence in the model's true generalization ability. Even intuitively, it doesn't make sense to improve performance on harder data, right? But gradual decrease can still be problematic if it's too steep. A sharp drop from training to validation is classic overfitting, memorization without real learning. So which of these three models is actually healthy? The answer should be clear from the graph. Remember, we need both a monotonic and gradual decline. Only one model meets both criteria. We've examined three algorithms, analyzed their learning curves, and checked for monotonic decrease across all data splits. Now let's bring it all together. The first algorithm posted the highest accuracy, but learning curves told a different story. Perfect training accuracy, stagnant validation, massive gap. Classic overfitting. Disqualified. The second algorithm before augmentation also showed overfitting. That large gap between training and validation performance means this model can't be trusted to generalize either. Therefore, it's also disqualified from clinical consideration. When we augmented algorithm 2, the learning curves improved dramatically, smooth convergence, minimal gap when plateaued. Theoretically, the model now demonstrates healthy learning dynamics. But hold your horses, that's not the full picture. Because when we check the performance metrics, all of them, not just accuracy, we see something troubling. The metrics unexplainably increased between validation and testing subsets. Performance improved as data became less familiar. This is a red flag. Remember, we need monotonic decrease. When metrics improve downstream, something is methodologically wrong. So despite those beautiful learning curves, this model is also disqualified. Now, the final algorithm. Despite slightly lower accuracy, it demonstrated both healthy learning curves and monotonic decrease across all metrics. This is exactly what we need. Both criteria satisfied. This is our clinically viable model. Keep this in mind when you see machine learning studies claiming high diagnostic accuracy. Request to see the learning dynamics. No learning dynamics analysis means no clinical trust. Patient safety demands better. Failure to apply to real-world scenarios compromises patient safety, which can lead to critical errors in diagnosis and treatment. Always assume that the result can be false positive or false negative. Now, a critical word on clinical implementation. When you get a positive result from the model, do spend that extra effort and time confirming that condition. Use the AI as a screening tool, but verify. But when you get a negative result, keep in mind it might very well be a false negative. In those cases, disregard that output and apply the standard of care you'd apply as if you never consulted the AI at all. The AI can help you catch cases, but it should never give you false reassurance to miss one. Patient safety comes first. Sure, FDA approval can provide some assurance, but here's the critical question. How much trust do you want to place in someone else's know-how and standards? Are you confident they checked for all the methodological shortcut, Besides, we aren't even there yet. These high standards of evaluation are not being systematically applied to these models. These standards aren't even formalized yet. Plenty of peer-reviewed studies are getting published without proper learning dynamics analysis. When it comes to real-world practice, it's your patients and your practice that will be held accountable when something goes wrong. The regulators and developers won't be there to explain the model's failure. Due diligence is your responsibility. To make sure an AI solution truly generalizes, one needs to test it on external datasets. And by external, I mean genuinely external. Not just a different data set, but one with data collected at another institution on a different cohort of patients. Not some sister hospital across the street. A truly independent institution. Ideally, the data should be collected using different technology, handled by different personnel, under different clinical workflows. This is the only way to definitely verify that a machine learning model isn't just learning the quirks of your local setup, your specific equipment, your imaging protocols, your patient population. Real-world generalization requires real-world testing conditions. Naturally, one would expect yet another decline in accuracy when tested on a truly external dataset. And again, the key is monotonic, gradual decrease. Performance should be lowest on external data, but the decline from test to external should be controlled and expected. If the opposite happens, if external accuracy rises above test, that's a red flag. And if the drop is too steep, that also signals problems. We need both monotonicity and gradual decline for a clinically trustworthy model. In our study, such a decline satisfying both conditions, monotonic and gradual, was only observed with a third algorithm. Interestingly, precision actually rose on the external dataset. When a model encounters unfamiliar data, it often becomes more conservative with positive predictions. This increases precision, meaning the model is right more often when it does predict positive, even as recall drops, because it's missing more cases. This is acceptable behavior. Precision can increase under distribution shift, while accuracy, F1, and recall all decrease monotonically. It's a sign of cautious, conservative prediction, not a red flag like we'd see with accuracy or F1 increasing. Before trusting a model for patient care, it's vital to ensure multiple metrics are reported, not just accuracy. Look for confusion matrices to understand error patterns, verify that a robust data splitting methodology was used, and demand the learning dynamics I've explained here. Also, confirm that external validation was performed on truly independent data. Of course, external validation isn't always possible. Then it becomes even more critical to evaluate all the learning dynamics presented here to ensure the model won't simply guess when faced with new patients. For a detailed checklist of what to demand from anyone pitching AI solutions, check out my book, AI-Assisted Medical Diagnostics. Chapters 8 and 9 provide comprehensive frameworks for conducting due diligence. Unfortunately, we're still in a phase where standardized reporting guidelines are lacking. While new guidelines are starting to emerge, they often skip over critical aspects, such as how to effectively demonstrate healthy learning dynamics. They might include vague recommendations like prevent overfitting, but rarely specify what should be reported to prove that overfitting didn't occur. Moreover, overfitting is just one of many potential shortcuts to achieving high accuracy. Shortcuts that can ultimately undermine the true clinical utility of the final product. As a result, when reviewing AI diagnostic studies, you'll notice that many report accuracy without providing insights into learning dynamics. The absence of validation, whether through internal learning dynamics or external testing, is a major red flag. Without it, there's no guarantee of real-world reliability, leading to misleading conclusions about clinical effectiveness. It's not hard to imagine the consequences. If poorly validated AI solutions continue to be developed, clinicians will inevitably encounter failures in practice and lose trust in AI-assisted diagnostics. And once trust is lost, it can take years to rebuild. By compromising rigor today, we risk undermining the credibility of the entire field tomorrow. It's easy to be seduced by impressive accuracy numbers. Don't be. You now know better. High accuracy without rigorous validation is often a red flag for data manipulation or overfitting. These inflated scores create false confidence and endanger patient safety when deployed. So what are the recommendations for future directions based on these findings? We need mandatory reporting standards. For classification tasks, which is the most common machine learning application in clinical diagnosis, all reports must include learning curve analysis, multi-tier validation across all data splits, and complete confusion matrices. Classification models that diagnose medical conditions require these rigorous evaluation standards. Without them, we cannot ensure patient safety. Second, regulatory alignment is vital. This means adhering to FDA guidance on AI documentation, ensuring transparent and reproducible workflows, and openly reporting performance limitations. Progress is being made as the FDA and other regulatory agencies worldwide have already issued some guidelines. However, I'd argue these need to be expanded to include more specific requirements on evaluating learning dynamics, addressing biases in training data, and establishing clear standards for internal and external validations. Without these specifics, regulatory oversight may fall short in ensuring the safe and effective deployment of diagnostic AI in clinical settings. Here's what you must remember: methodological rigor over superficial metrics. Focus on reliable estimates that reflect real-world performance, not overly optimistic numbers. This emphasis on reliability is what ensures our models can consistently deliver safe, effective patient care. Methodology matters because patients matter. For a detailed breakdown of the key graphs and metrics to monitor when evaluating machine learning models, I recommend Chapter 3 of my book, AI-Assisted Medical Diagnostics. It offers comprehensive guidance on understanding learning dynamics and performance patterns. Here's the core takeaway: the inadequacy of conventional machine learning evaluations, those that prioritize final accuracy numbers, creates significant risks in clinical environments. Learning dynamics reveal what accuracy alone cannot. That is, whether a model is truly prepared to handle real patients. My name is Milan Toma. I'm an associate professor at the College of Osteopathic Medicine at New York Institute of Technology. I teach a class with the same name as my book, AI-Assisted Medical Diagnostics. In this course, our medical students develop their own AI-powered tools to diagnose medical conditions of their choice. And critically, they learn how to check these models for real-world readiness using the methods I've discussed in this session. This is something every future physician should learn, not just how to use AI tools, but how to evaluate them critically and responsibly before trusting them with patient care.